I really do believe Maritime has something for everybody, but people don't know about it because we've got the support aspects to Maritime. You don't even actually have to go to sea to be part of Maritime.
Welcome to the Shipping Podcast, where I meet interesting maritime professionals sharing their passion for the shipping industry and their everyday job. I am your host. My name is Lena Gothberg. Hello, Shipping Podcast listeners. Happy New Year! I hope you have had some enjoyable holidays and the chance to relax a bit. Some of you might have had the time to listen to my bonus episode, which I released last Friday. That was my Christmas gift to you. My next gift to you is this interview. We are kicking off 2020 with a great woman whom I met recently. She has a dual degree. She's both a master mariner and a chief engineer. And now she is the CEO of the Red Funnel. This interview was made during the London International Shipping Week on September the 12th, 2019. Just in case you wonder why I keep referring to last year's IMO theme, the Empowering Women in the Maritime Community theme. So, this is Fran Collins for you, Chief Executive Officer of Red Funnel. Welcome to the Shipping Podcast. Could you please introduce yourself?
I'm Fran Collins and I'm currently the CEO of Red Funnel Ferries.
So what is your background?
My background is from the Merchant Navy. I left home at 16 and joined the Merchant Navy, and probably my route into that was slightly unexpected in that the school I was at was very focused on qualifications and university. They were not keen for me to step away from academia. And when I wrote to Shell Tankers to apply, they sent me a glossy brochure which had pictures of the Sydney Opera House in there and pictures of icebergs, and it looked like a really interesting career. So I filled the application form in, and that was the only company I applied to and got offered a dual cadetship, because at that point in Britain, Shell was only offering dual cadetships. So at the age of 16, I left my home in the southwest of England and went to the northeast of England, which was quite a culture shock, and did 4 years as a dual cadet on tankers for Shell. And then I qualified in 1997 with an officer at the then Class 3, but now officer of the watch licence, and a Class 4 steam and motor engineering licence. And then I sailed primarily on tankers, which was fantastic. So most of my time has been spent in the Far East and the Middle East, quite a lot of time out in the Caribbean, which was great, and quite a bit of time out on the west coast of America.
But what made you take that decision at the age of 16? Why did you want to go to sea?
I don't know if I wanted to go to sea, but it looked exciting. There was something in there. I've always been, and my parents always encouraged me to take an opportunity if it looked, and I think I've subscribed to that all the way through my career. If something has come up and it's an opportunity, I look at it. Does it look interesting? Does it look exciting? And generally, most things are one, if not both, and I've generally taken them. And I think that probably was part of my character when I was 16.
Mm-hmm. And then what?
Then, because I went to work for Chevron, at that point, Chevron had a lot of Italian officers who weren't so keen on having a woman in the engine room. Because I had a dual license, I didn't have a strong preference whether it was engineering or deck. But I naturally got more sea time because some of the Italian officers didn't really want a female in their engine room. And my career really started to move towards getting deck time. So I did 2 or 3 trips as engineer, but primarily on deck. And then I moved around between tankers and cable ships, which was probably a little bit diverse, but it was where the opportunities were. And you know what our industry is like, and it fluctuates a lot. So that was the opportunity. And then I had a bit of time off for a medical issue, so I lost my deep sea medical, got a coastal medical, and I went to Condor Ferries, which was based where I was living. I signed up with them for a 6-week contract, which fundamentally turned into 16 years.
Oh, I see.
It was, it was one of those, it's a great company. They liked me, I liked them. I did the 6-week contract and stayed with them that was on high-speed ferries. and conventional row packs. And then after getting promoted to master, I sailed for a few years as captain on those ships. And then the then operations director persuaded me to come into the office on a 6-month secondment, and I didn't want to do it. I was quite happy driving ships around and having a great time. I'd been starting to look a little bit at working as a pilot in the river on the estuary, but I was having a ball, frankly. And then I was talked into going ashore for 6 months, and it really opened my eyes, and I didn't go back. And then I took a variety of roles. So I was operations manager, then I became operations director, and then the company had a restructure and an opportunity arose to take a commercial role. So I took the commercial role for a few years, and then there was another restructure and I became the executive director for operations. And then 18 months ago, 2 years ago, I was invited to apply for the role of CEO at my current company. And if I'm really honest, I didn't think I'd get it. Ferry companies and shipping companies tend to be quite traditional. I'm comparatively young. I left school at 16, got a master's license and a lot of relevant experience. And in some ways, that made the interview process quite easy. Because if you don't think you're going to get the job, you can actually genuinely be yourself because you've got nothing to lose almost. And I think probably nobody more surprised than me when they offered me the job.
So you were what they were looking for.
Yeah. And I think that's really, really exciting because, you know, shipping companies and investors and owners have historically been very risk averse. And we can see that times are changing now because they wanted to move away from the conventional CEO. You know, I'm quite informal about things. I'm full of energy for stuff. I get excited about stuff, and I like to work closely with the teams. My approach is very collaborative, and I think it's inspiring when we start to see now with other women in the industry and with the men coming through that the ship owners are looking for a different breed.
That's good. I haven't really realized that yet, but that's interesting. How come, do you think?
I don't know. I wonder if is that because the generations are changing as we see things coming through. The people who are now in charge of the funds and the owners and the money, they've probably changed. They're a different generation. But I think there's a big focus on culture. When we first went to sea, it was very disconnected. It was very hierarchical. Now we've changed that. We've gone into bridge resource management so that the captain is still the captain, but we encourage the team to work as a team, to challenge, to question, to make it more robust. So we've moved away from that old-fashioned dictatorial, and I guess that's kind of coming through now into the management side.
Yeah. It would only be better if it went faster, I think.
The pace of change is, it's culture, isn't it, I suppose? And culture is such a slow thing to change. But hopefully what we will see is a bit of an acceleration of it coming through.
But it starts at the top, as you're saying. So how big is your company? I'm sorry, I don't know much about the Red Funnel.
No, Red Funnel is a UK domestic operator. We've been around since we were initially incorporated in around about 1820, and then in its current guise in around about the 1860s. So we've been around for a long time. We operate between Southampton on the south coast and the Isle of Wight, which is a small island in the Solent estuary. And we provide a lifeline service. We operate 3 high-speed catamarans, and we've got 3 vehicle ferries. They're small comparatively. And we have a freight ferry, which we just built. We have around about 600 employees, our colleagues, and we transport around about 3 million passengers a year, 3.5 million passengers, and around just under 1 million vehicle movements. And we operate 365 days a year like many other shipping companies.
So how do you find, being a CEO? What's the difference? Yeah, you are in charge, but...
I would say I love being the CEO, and I love the company I work with. And when I took the role as CEO, I was very clear that I had to make sure that the role and that the expectation of the shareholder, the values that they had would fit with my values. And because our shareholders see themselves as they're guardians for the future for our company. It's been around for so long. It's a long-term piece. So it's very important that the culture of the shareholders and the owners has to work with the CEO. When you start to see the differences you can make and you start to see the teams flying, that's what I find really exciting. I love that. You set the values and you set the vision, and then you can empower people so that they can actually make that happen. And then you're just there as a steady hand on the tiller, guiding to make sure that everything's going in the right direction.
So what about the discussion on shortage of people in the maritime industry? Do you see that?
Yes, I think we do. And there are quite a few issues with the shortage of people. And I'm quite passionate about it, to be honest, because I think there's this big change. When I went to sea, we could spend £7 a minute to phone home on the sat phone. So my parents waved me off, and then they didn't really see or hear from me for another 4 months or even up to 6 months. Nowadays, because we've got connectivity, which has been a really good thing, and it's improved life on board. But what it's also done is it means people know what they're missing. And where we end up in a situation with perhaps a very multinational crew with a big cultural change, we don't have I would say, we used to call it the bar life, but that's, how do I put it? It's the kind of almost the family feel, because every ship was like a family. You didn't always get on, but you all worked together and you lived together. And because of the connectivity now, people tend to spend less time out with their colleagues and more time in their cabins. And they do know what they're missing because they can see their friends and family at home. And it's a double-edged sword, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
But I think that's where we need to attract more people, everybody into the industry, because younger people, the schools don't pitch it as a career in many cases. And people don't realise what it can lead you to. So I went away to sea at the age of 16, and now I'm in charge of the company. Mm. And I don't think this will be my last move. I'm 42 years old, and the opportunities are just endless. And I love Maritime. I intend to stay in it, but the skills I've developed all the way through my career are transferable into any business. And you get a set of life skills that you can't match. You learn to work with people that you don't like. You have to live with people. And what it comes down to is you have to learn to trust people, because one day your life may be in that person's hands. And I think it gives you an almost an innate sense of self-confidence, because when you join a ship, you walk on, and it's terrifying the first time. You stand there at the age of 16 and you look up and you, my God, this is enormous. Who are all these people? And you get used to it.
And you love it.
Yeah, I love it. You can tell, can't you? And I've got my master's license. I keep my master's license. I don't know if I'll ever go back to sea, but I love to have it. And I'm very lucky, sometimes when I go on my ships now, the masters ask me, do you want to have a drive, Fran? And I take so much, I'm so humbled by that. But it's always the best bit of the job.
Yeah, I can understand that. And also this year is Empowering Women in the Maritime Industry year, the theme for that from IMO. And we met at IMO on a panel where you were talking. Mm-hmm. What is your view on this diversity question?
Diversity is so important in every aspect, not just from a gender point of view, because, again, I think it goes back to the onboard culture and where we're seeing change. You took the old-fashioned view of a sailor was very, very specific. We can't be that specific now because the world is so diverse. We're encouraging diversity as our children come through school, as they grow up. We actually embrace that. So previously, and I think we're talking quite a long way back now, everybody fitted a mould. And shipping is taking a while to catch up that there isn't this mould anymore. So we have to embrace diversity. We have to encourage it, because that makes better living conditions on board. And it means that we will still have as a maritime force in the future.
Yeah, I have spoken to other interviewees and asked them if they see any change after they have implemented the diversity policy into their system, and they see a difference where there are more women. And
it makes but it's the same on any team. It's the same on a management team. I think what we've got to be careful of is that we have to steer it and guide it and culturally change it, but we can't inflict it. And it's a very fine line and a balance that we need to strike. And it's going to take a long time, because if you consider the amount of time it takes to attract those talented individuals into the companies, into the businesses, to train them, are we ever going to see 50% split, a gender split? I hope so, but I doubt it, because one of the things that I think is difficult, and we spoke about it at the IMO, is that for a woman it's quite hard if she wants to have a family and continue to sail. And that's where companies like my company, Red Funnel, is good, because our colleagues can go home in the evening. So it does mean they can manage a semblance of a family life. a lot of the cruise companies allow the people to take their children away, but it's still tough, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. I got friends. I got a friend who works at the Icebreaker, and she's away for 2 weeks, and she's at home for 2 weeks. And social media on that one, I mean, FaceTiming and all of that helps.
Yeah.
It's not the same. You don't see your child every evening, but on the other hand, you're at home for 2 weeks after that, and
yeah,
it's a new way of handling the family life as well.
And isn't it funny how that was what the men did historically anyway, went away and still do in many cases. If you certainly look at some of the traditions and the culture of the long contracts, certainly we see a lot of the Filipino crews doing 6, 12 upwards contract terms, and they leave their families. And I think that's one of the things that we've got to try and get, again, shipping, strike that balance of bringing it into the connectivity, but making sure that we retain onboard life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
because it can be quite a lonely life.
Of course,
but
it can.
But then so can living in a city.
Yes, it could also be very isolated and whatever if you don't have any other people to.
It's interesting what you say there as well about the family life side of things, because something I've been thinking about recently is that if you look at office life, it's set up very much around a 1950s conventional family where the mother stayed at home to look after the children and the father went out to work. What I want to get to with Red Funnel, and it'll take us a while to consider it and to implement it, is to say, hey, we're a shipping company. Why are our office hours 8 till 5:30? Why don't we open the office potentially 24/7? But why don't we open it from 6 in the morning till 10 at night? People will still do their contracted hours, but they get to pick. Because that way we actually encourage talent in. We might see people who've left the industry to have children. We give them the opportunity then to come back in because they can fit it in around childcare arrangements and life. And I think the cultural shift again of young people coming through is changed. People don't expect to do 8 till 5:30. They expect to deliver the job.
And also I think, I'm from Sweden and we have a paternity leave. So if the parents do not take the part of the paternity leave, that goes away. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of enforced upon them to also have the father at home with the children. And I think that has been a success. So now it's more men that want to stay at home. They share it 50-50, the mother and the father. And I live in an area where there's so many men and all these children and and they're out walking together. So I can see herds of young men with their small children walking towards the park. And that gives me hope.
I think, and there is hope. And what we see as well is there's so much talent coming through into our industry. It's the people that are coming into our industry are flying. Yeah. The opportunities are there and they see those opportunities. And I think, again, getting into the schools and saying to people, you can choose to go to sea, you'll get a set of life skills, but those skills are transferable. You don't join the Merchant Navy and then you can do, and lots of people do. And to be honest, I would still be quite happy if my career had done that. But the opportunities, you can go in any direction.
Yeah, you can.
And it's not just business, there's law, from the HR side of things, there's just everything, accident investigation, regulation.
Yes, I agree.
So broad.
But I also think I see that it's the young women who are bringing in the new knowledge into our industry, and that makes me happy. It's the young women, they are interested in autonomous ships and 3D printing and blockchain and all of that.
And that's the bit that I think is really interesting, because we're into this, we've got Maritime 2050 in the UK, which is fantastic, but we're into a point now where we need technology. And for those of us who are a little bit older, it's quite hard to think outside the box, because that's a scope, it's autonomous ships. And I find that quite hard to get my head around, because it's definitely going to come. But we've got the young generation coming through, and they've got all of the enthusiasm and all of the ability and the skills. And I think we're going to see a really rapid increase in the technology.
I totally agree. But I also think that why do the young women make their sort of careers within these areas? And I think, there is no men standing in their way there. The men hasn't really come to those areas. Yeah, some of them have, but I see it's easier to make a career as a woman in the maritime industry in those places where it's not an old
The old boys network.
Yeah. And an old set way of doing things.
And I think I would just clarify. So I say the old boys network.
Oh.
That's not all men. There are a lot of, and one of the things I would say is there's been a lot of people in my career that they saw something in me, they cajoled me, they persuaded me, they gave me a kick up the bum if it was required, and they've supported me and guided me. And that is one of the things that, again, with our industry is I consider myself so lucky, and I try wherever I can to play that forward so that we do support people coming through.
Yeah. It's a people's business.
It's all about the people.
And it's also very important how you build your relationship from the start, because the people you know when you start, they will follow you, or you will meet them again.
It's all about your values.
Yes.
And I think that's something, again, going away to sea early, because being at sea it's a funny thing, because everybody thinks that seafarers are quite rigid and quite set in their ways. And what I found was seafarers actually, they take the mickey something chronic. They are always teasing each other. If you listen to the conversation, you would think you had the worst bunch of sexist, racist, homophobic, and actually they don't really care as long as you can do your job.
Mm-hmm.
They actually, not everybody clearly, but in most cases I found that it was more, in a way, it was a funny sort of term of affection, but you weren't I didn't find, in most cases I wasn't denigrated, I was respected because I could do my job. And I stay in touch with a lot of those guys even now.
I think there are some young people who maybe find it a little bit hard to get into that environment, and maybe they should also think about that to include the young ones.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the shift, isn't it? That cultural change.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the things that take time.
Yes, it does. So what are the biggest changes that you have seen sort of in the shipping industry through the years?
The biggest changes I've seen, I think the connectivity is a huge piece. And I'm still slightly, it's a double-edged sword a little bit, because with the reduction in crew sizes and the contraction of port times, I was lucky. I came through probably at the last bastion of that kind of generational piece. So I saw good shore leave. They still had a good bar life on the ships. It was regulated, but now most ships are dry. We were into multinational crews, so the multinational crew side of thing for the diversity is fantastic. But when you find it very hard to find a common language on board, that's quite challenging for people. So I think that shift into that, and some of that probably comes right back down to the fact that we are struggling to attract seafarers into our industry.
So my favorite question, how do we become more visible for the general public? Because I think that is where it starts. We need to brand ourselves.
We need to brand ourselves, exactly.
So how do we do that?
We need to market our industry. In the UK, most people don't realise where their food comes from. They don't realise that over 95% of what's brought into the country comes in by sea. It's I think you're never more than 70 miles away in the UK from the coast, but people don't see it. So there's a branding piece, and that means that we need to have our industry bodies need to be joined up and cohesive so that we do get that out there. And then I think the other side of it is we need to have good role models of all levels, and to go into schools, to make it attractive, or not make it attractive, that's the wrong word, to actually be visible, to say to people, you're not just coming in to an industry, you can consider this, there are loads of options and there are loads of routes into it. And nowadays you can get the degree out of it. So you can do your training, you're not coming out of it with a purely industry-based qualification, you come out of that with a degree, which again gives you further stead for the future. So I think we need the role models, and we need people to be flying the flag and shouting from the rooftops.
I agree, because we have a tendency to speak to each other.
Yeah, we do, don't we just?
And that is also one of the reasons why I started this podcast, because it's available to anyone who listens to podcasts. You can do it wherever and from wherever. But I realize now that there is the shipping industry is listening in on the other guests from the shipping industry. So my purpose was something, but what happened was something else. But still, I get a lot of feedback from young people, and as you say, I mean, it shows them that there is a different path to choose from in here.
And I think we also need to ask young people what they want. So there's it's almost a liaison piece, I guess, that says when people are looking and they're starting, because we ask people to pick their careers really around about 14, 15, when they start to do their exam selections. And that's really young. And what we need to do is we should be saying to people, this is a career you could consider. It could lead you to other things. It's a really good stepping stone if you don't wish to stay at sea. And if you do wish to stay at sea, you'll have an amazing, amazing career. But when people decide not to apply for it, I'm like, okay, why? What puts people off joining our industry?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because it's comparatively well paid in many cases. There are aspects of it that are not attractive to people. But there are lots of aspects that should be. So what can we do to make it more saleable?
I listened to a very wise woman on Monday this week. She was speaking at the Vista UK gathering, and she said that asking or selling the concept of maritime career to young women, that was okay. But then the women said, yeah, that sounds fine, but that's not for people like me. So there is somewhere,
so it's not for everybody.
It's somewhere in there that we need to actually...
We have to understand what people like those people are. So, this is a why. What do you mean people like you? Because it is one of those careers that you can, it's not, I suppose if you take it as medicine, you have and there's so many different skill sets in it. So you could go into engineering, you can go into navigation side of things, catering. If you go look at cruise industry, there are so many aspects into that. So it's at every level. But why do people feel they don't want to do that?
I think it goes back to the branding thing. Because if you Google seafarer, I've done that, and then it turns up like it's Popeye or someone similar to him. He's very old. He's a white man, and he's looking into binoculars.
And he probably has a beard.
Yeah, and a bottle of rum. So that is what we need to change as well. And I'm not quite sure that the international bodies or the bodies in this country understands that we need to change the Google. What comes up in Google.
And that's going to take us so long to do. But this goes back to the role models, and the more media, and media generally, I mean, we get out there, and the more material we're putting out in, then the more that's going to percolate through the Google images. But we need to have, as an industry, we need to have our organisations supporting that, because we can all do bits and pieces of it, but I think we really need to have that cohesive strategy. And that was what I thought was quite exciting when we did the panel piece at the IMO, was the number of people that turned up to it.
Yeah,
there is a definite commitment in our industry, but we need support to do that. We need something to lead that. And I think IMO is ideally placed for it, and it is doing a fine job.
Yeah.
But we have to, I suppose it's a bit like the environmental aspects of things. We need to perhaps sign up to the charters, which we are doing. But do we need to have something more based around the flag states, not just the companies?
I think so. But who am I to have a view on that?
But it's disappointing, isn't it? I think when I first went to sea, we were 3% female in the industry. What a good 20-something years later, we're still 3% in the industry.
Yeah. I have had a guest on who is from the Royal Caribbean Cruise Line, and he's been talking about that. So I will have to refer people to an earlier episode. Yeah. But they managed to change that.
Yes, they've got, I actually saw something on LinkedIn, haven't they? They've got, but globally, we're still 3%. At Red Funnel, because we're attractive to people who have families, and the industry attracts people. Some people go to sea because they like to be the captain and they want to go on the deep sea vessels and do the cruise ship. Some people come to sea because they just love ship handling. And then there are all the short sea coastal options. So you don't even have to the two roles are so totally different. You don't even have to tie yourself to that.
No. And some of us just fell in love with all the people and the environment and meeting all these interesting people, because you never meet a dull person in the maritime industry.
No.
There's only characters.
There are a lot of characters.
Yeah, I think so. So did you have a role model growing up yourself?
No, I don't. I think I wouldn't say there was anybody really as a role model. That I was always pretty independent as a child. And I think going through, I've seen people that have, certainly not a female role model, but in terms of male, there was, obviously, when I was a child, Margaret Thatcher was a role model because she really broke the mold. But that piece, I was lucky in that my parents have never, ever told me I couldn't do something. They have always been absolutely supportive. And my father was a much older guy. And when I said to him at 16, I'm going to join the Merchant Navy, he never said, and he was in his late 60s, he didn't say that's not a career for a girl. He didn't say, you can't do that. He said to me, that looks interesting. He said, but if you start it, you need to finish it. Don't quit. And that was so I think that kind of drive pushed through. And then I've seen people, and I was almost brought up with, if somebody else can do it, I can probably have a fair bash at it. Mm-hmm. But on that point, it would have been great to have had a role model. And it would have been great to have had support and mentoring. And one of the things I love about what I do now is I have a huge network, because that's what you get in the maritime industry, of peers and seniors, and I can phone anybody if I want to talk about something. Now I have got that support network. And I hope that we can get that through to people coming through now, because it's much harder in the maritime side of things when you're actually on board or doing things to generate that. And, I've been lucky. I've come through and I've met people, and there are some fantastic women out there and men doing things. Last night when I was at an event, I saw Katie Ware at the MCA and Gemma Griffin, and they're superb. It's the connections and the connectivity. Again, if you look at, we're all, Gemma, myself and Katie, we're all pretty senior in what we do. We've all got very different backgrounds. We've all got very different skill sets and very different upbringings. And we're all successful, and we've been supported by our industry. But I think, when we saw Katie at the IMO, her motivations were very different to mine.
Yes, they were. But that was exciting to hear, because, it isn't everything, as you said before, it's not one size fits all with everything. But some things speaks to me and some other things speaks to you, and that's might be the reason why you choose the career of a maritime industry.
And maritime speaks, I really do believe maritime has something for everybody, but people don't know about it because we've got the support aspects to maritime. You don't even actually have to go to sea to be part of maritime.
No, and lately I've been involved in a lot of discussions with people on trade, world trade. That is now on the first page of every paper. And so world trade and geopolitical hotspots, mm-hmm. and what's happening in the Persian Gulf and things like that.
Exactly.
Brexit, I think it has actually put trade and shipping on the map, even if you don't want it. So I think that is probably... But we need to be on the front page for good things as well.
Yeah.
Because
and we need to celebrate
so
our success.
Good. Yes.
I think as an industry, we're not great at celebrating our success.
Not
generally.
At all, no.
Yeah. We're getting better, mm-hmm. but we're not brilliant at it as an industry. We don't blow our own trumpet. We kind of, and that's almost the culture, isn't it? We do what we do, we get on with it, we sort it out, fix the problems, carry on, and we're the unseen aspects of supporting the British Islands.
Yeah, we're called
internationally.
We're called the Cinderella industry. And I think that's really describes it. We do what we do. True. But so let's get invited to a ball then.
Yeah, let's try and get it out there.
I think so. Thank you very much, Fran.
No, thank you. It's my pleasure.
Being on the podcast and being a role model, because I understand that people look up to you and they see that anything is possible.
And it's an honor and a privilege and a responsibility. And I take all of those very seriously.
Thank you, Fran, for sharing so much wisdom. I'm so happy I got to know you, and I look forward to seeing you soon again. So it's a new year. It's a new decade. It's 2020, with all the hopes and expectations that we all have. My expectations are that you help me lift this podcast to the position I think it deserves. I want your feedback on guests you want to listen to, and I want to hear constructive criticism on how I can make the shipping podcast even better. On top of that, I want you to share with your colleagues and peers that they should also download and listen to the shipping podcast. And finally, I need your companies to support the shipping podcast through advertisement and or sponsoring. I'm still on the fence about which way to go, to build a platform with a couple of large companies spending a very small part of their marketing budget on this podcast and thereby branding themselves as the companies that believes in change and all the other values that I stand for. Or if I should allow for ads. All I know is that what I want to achieve with the Shipping Podcast cannot come from my own pockets. I need to raise some more funds. Drop me a line at hello@shippingpodcast.com with your views on how this podcast can become bigger and more financially sustainable. Meanwhile, I have just started the recordings for this year. I have some more interesting people in pipeline for you. So, until the next time, from me to you, over and out. Thank you for listening to the Shipping Podcast. Don't forget to tell everyone that you meet that there is a Shipping Podcast available and that they should download it and listen to the maritime professionals who are sharing their passion for the shipping industry.